Good afternoon, Chairman Berger, ranking members Senator Franz and Representative Davis. I'm here to testify in opposition to HB 7054, Keno. I understand that this committee has a very challenging task in seeking revenue for a significant budgetary shortfall. And we are doing our best, and I applaud and admire the work that this committee has to undertake. But when we talk about Keno, it feels like it's deja vu all over again. Having served 7 years in this General Assembly, I remember it being floated by Governor Rao, and then a couple of years ago, it was put into a budget where nobody knew how it got there. And to that, and all the other times that Keno has appeared, the public through the General Assembly has spoken and recognized that this is not what they want. What they understand in Keno is ultimately it is a lottery game, but it is a completely different lottery game than the static exchange of cards. We are looking to bring Keno as a gambling game that may be similar to bingo that we see in our churches, but we're taking it to another level of bringing that as an interactive game that goes into the very essence of a family setting. You're going to go into restaurants, you're going to go into settings where families could be exposed to gambling. It is not unusual for the idea, as I have seen in Massachusetts, that a family would be going to a dinner and a child would be enamored with the dancing screens, as so many of our younger generation have gotten engaged to, of computer games, that we are now promoting that a parent, in an innocent way, could expose their young children to the idea that gambling is acceptable on a formal dining experience. You know, I think the state has recognized for our history that gambling is part of our culture and revenue stream. But we have only seen it restricted to tribal lands. We are now looking to expand not only in regards to Keno, but in regards to casinos. This kind of expansion is a ill-advised foray in seeking short-term solutions of revenue. When I say it's a short-term solution in revenue, one of the things that is significant that we have not addressed in seeking these revenue sources is that gambling addiction is an illness. It is an illness that permeates in creating an addiction that is not easily stopped. We are looking at creating a generation of people who would be addicted to gambling, and I bring up the stories, and I hope when you consider this as a revenue source, you will also take a moment and hear the stories of lives shattered. When I hear of the stories of the Jonies of the world, you'll hear their testimonies, and Donnas of the world, middle-aged women who 15 years ago led a fully productive life of family, raising their children, pillars of the community. And you'll hear their stories when you see them appear before you as individuals that does not show any symptom of addictive behavior. But their stories will be a chilling effect. Their stories will tell you that they won their first lottery ticket. They got the high. Then they continue to go to the casinos. Then they continue to play the lottery. And they find that they get the thrill of gambling, the onset of addiction. And you fast forward and you hear about broken lives, marriages lost, families devastated, crime committed. You're talking to these women who have served criminal time for fraud and embezzlement. And one of the things that we need to consider is they have also considered taking their lives. One of the highest causes of suicide is gambling, debt, and addiction. These are issues that cannot be measured by short-term solutions of dollars and cents. We have not done a significant study of the societal costs on our communities in gambling. We have not done one in over 10 years. For the revenue that we are anticipated to gain, potentially from our last debate on Keno, nearly $30 million during a budget cycle. The fact of the matter is we have not addressed how much it cost our communities to pick up the pieces of broken lives, of what that cost is to the state in providing these kind of social services. It is a regressive tax at its worst form. I grant that we have a lottery system in our state, but I caution that when we initially began this discussion, as I've talked to so many people throughout the state, their first reaction was, well, of course, I remember the lottery when it was started. It was all going to go to education. That was one of the cursors of it. But the reality is it goes into our general fund, and it is a short-term solution. And I recognize that I welcome for us to explore all options of seeking revenue. But I much rather for us to seek in enhancing our manufacturing businesses and our economy in regards to building businesses, creating higher earning wages, but at the same time also looking at concepts like learn here, live here, to allow our young people to be able to stay in the state, spend money, pay taxes. Those type of issues are important when we look at revenue sources. I don't believe gambling is the way to go. Another example of talking about revenue is our nonprofit arts and culture industry generates nearly $650 million of revenue. It enhances our businesses and restaurants and ancillary shopping. Why are we not supporting that industry? Why are we not empowering our state and our communities to generate revenue in a positive effort and not taking a net revenue and potentially negatively impacting people's lives that could least afford it? Be glad to take any questions, and I thank you, Mr. Chair, for your indulgence on this issue.
Thank you, Senator. In your testimony, obviously, you're opposed to the Keno model. So I would consider through that testimony that you're opposed to casino expansion. Is that correct?
Absolutely, sir.
Okay, then when you talk about the model of the lottery and casinos that are currently in the state of Connecticut, and you talk about the problems associated with that, do you in your mind feel that both the lottery and the casinos are going to go away someday?
That's a very good question. And as I cited earlier, we recognize that for the past 20 years, the state of Connecticut has a unique relationship with our casinos and with our Connecticut lottery system. But as we have seen in the Quinnipiac poll recently, that the people of Connecticut recognize that gambling exists in our state, but they did not support expansion outside of tribal lands. The other aspect is nearly 59% also believe that we should not be bringing Keno into our state. Now, I grant that. It's a revenue stream that I wish we never got into, because for me, as a legislator and a representative of this General Assembly, I truly believe that we, as a state, should not be in the business of condoning gambling as a revenue source. It's a quick solution. Now, I say that it seems like we're playing a gambling game when we talk about seeking revenue. But people need to understand, look at the devastational effects of what has happened to the Atlantic City area. The doubling down of building out more and more extravagant casinos and thinking they can revive a sagging business model. What we have seen is a complete failure of not only the casino business as a whole. We have seen a complete devastation of the quality of life in the area. I had a chance to talk to a former pastor of Cape May in New Jersey, and she had an opportunity to share some experiences. Their community churches pick up the pieces of the broken lives. There are so many more of the Jonies and Donnas of the world that live in silence, because to them, gambling addiction leading to a life of crime is suffered in silence till there is a point of no return. Unfortunately, Donna and Joni in their testimony will show that they have turned their lives around. But unfortunately, as a result of gambling, there are so many other people whose lives are ruined that we do not see. And that's the difference for me when I talk about expansion of gambling and casinos and lotteries and Keno. Here's the deal. I do not believe we should be in the business of condoning and empowering gambling expansion as a means of feeding our spending habits.
Senator, I think it's important to understand that when we, in this committee moving forward, that it's not just about revenue. And I think it's unfair for the Connecticut Lottery to say that if we institute Keno, Connecticut's going to be like Atlantic City. That's a whole different model, Senator. And I think that you know that, and you're a very intelligent person, that the model that is the casino model in Atlantic City is not the lottery model or the Keno model for the state of Connecticut. They're quite a different model. But with that said, it's just not a revenue issue for us in the state of Connecticut. And your testimony talks at great length about, you know, the hole that we have in the state of Connecticut and the revenue issue that we have. Listen, if we enact Keno, that's not taking care of our revenue problem. But what it will do, it will support the Connecticut Lottery in its business model. Now, if we're going to look, and I know that you're entirely opposed to all of that, but if you would just indulge me for a minute and consider another option. For us to be competitive as a lottery, we have to be competitive with Massachusetts, New York, and Rhode Island. Now, there may have been lives that have, you know, gone to the wayside and been destroyed, like your testimony says, but they are a lottery that's thriving, that raises $790 million, that raises $1.4 billion, that raises another $1 billion just on Keno alone. Now, the state of Connecticut, the Connecticut Lottery raises like $1.4 billion in their total revenues. So for them to have a business model, and you know business, they need to be competitive. So it's important for the state of Connecticut to support the Connecticut Lottery as we see the General Assembly supporting casinos off sovereign land. So if this legislature, and I know you don't support that, were to support casinos off of sovereign land, then how can we not, in the same breath, not support our Connecticut Lottery, which brings in more revenue than both casinos combined? So that's, you know, that's my rub on it, and I know that you have a different opinion on it, but I think in support of a business model, in support of the Connecticut Lottery, in support of the good that they do, and let's just talk for 1 second about the good they do. When we passed the Keno bill, and then it was vetoed 2 years ago, the Connecticut Lottery committed to $400,000 a year to gambling cessation as part of the the Keno package, not the casino package, the Keno package. The Connecticut Lottery, even after we vetoed that bill, continued to support gambling cessation to over $1 million, even without the Keno money coming in. So the Connecticut Lottery and the state of Connecticut support what your goal is, but we also support the business model.
Mr. Chairman, I hear what you're saying, and you're right. We disagree in regards to the issue, but at best we are both consistent. I am consistent against the casino expansion as well, but I respect what the lottery does, and I made no intention to congeal them together when I talk about Atlantic City. I'm talking about the proliferation of expansion and gambling. But with that said, it's interesting that you say that even without the Keno, our lottery committed that amount of money to recovering at addiction. It sends a signal to me that it is a significantly larger problem of addiction that we have not addressed as a state, which goes back to my forefront discussion that if we are looking to seek and expand this as a revenue source, there are underlying costs that we truly do not know. I think we could spend another $500,000 as an outreach in helping people suffering in gambling addiction in silence. So with that said, I think in some ways that adds to the fuel that there could be underlying addictions out there, people losing and altering their lives for the negative that we have not gotten to. And, you know, I'd be happy to look at a compromise and taking a look that before we jump into any further casino expansion, that this organization and this body authorizes a comprehensive study to understand what are the societal costs of gambling addiction. And only then we can do a dollar-to-dollar comparison. If we make $30 million in Keno, but then have to spend another $50 million picking up pieces of lives of our residents that we as a government condone and encourage. You know, I can't turn on the TV nowadays without seeing a dollar in a dream. This plays to people for the opportunity that they could strike it rich. Studies have shown it caters and devastates low-wage earners, minorities, retirees, and the possibility of expanding Keno into restaurants where young families can view this as an acceptable pastime. What's next? Going to a Yankee game and playing a Keno card? That's what we're looking at. And I know that might be a possibility, but it takes and reinforces again that we are now accepting a culture where gambling is acceptable at every phase of our life. And to me, I don't believe that.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hello, Senator.
Hello, sir.
First statement off, you're off on the wrong foot with the Yankee thing, so I hope you understand where I'm coming from now. I very much, very strongly listened to your comments to us, and I don't think you and I are necessarily in the same place, but I want to tell you, you know, in our history of working together, I respect you very much. You mentioned a few things about exposure, and you know, I'm going to say aloud, I think that the lottery does a good job for the state of Connecticut. I certainly support what they're doing, and I will support Keno. I don't want there to be any people thinking otherwise. You know, our children and our families are exposed to all kinds of things. I mean, right now, Senator, when you go to the grocery store or to a convenience store, there are all kinds of things that our kids are exposed to. Lottery tickets, cigarettes, alcohol. And we have to make decisions, as you and I are both parents, we have to make those decisions when we explain to our children and try to teach them. As far as restaurants, I mean, I'm going back and forth on the addicted things because you get me when I listen to the personal stories, all right? You have me there. But there's all kinds of addictions that our people in our country face. And whether it's an alcohol addiction or an addiction to drugs, I mean, if you're an alcoholic and you go to a restaurant that has a bar, it's there. And you know, it's gotten to the point now where if you have, you know, this time of year you have bad sinuses, you can't even buy allergy medication because of addictive behavior. You have to go to the pharmacy and you know, request it through the pharmacist. So I don't know that it can be this simple. I think that it's part of our culture, for lack of better terms. I know so many young people that gamble not legally. I mean, there's a great market. I don't agree with it, but there's a great market for sports gambling. And, you know, I'll say from my own personal experiences, my son goes to University of Rhode Island. Sometimes we go in and we meet him and we're going to go grab a bite to eat. I'll throw a few bucks in the Keno thing when we're in a restaurant. I'm not, you know, I don't know that it's. I think whether you have the addictive behavior, my long-winded way of putting it, if you have that addictive behavior inside of you, regardless of what that addiction is, you're going to have it, and it's going to play.
Thank you, Representative Moore, and it was, and it continues to this day, a pleasure to work with you and you as a former chair of GAE. I think one of the things that we all have to understand as we consider this vote, for those that feel that it's a trade-off, that that we all have to make. I understand that. But for most of us, we can look at gambling as an objective basis because we can go through a couple dollars, we don't get hooked. That's the challenge. All right? We can all look at it objectively. But the challenge in this model, in gambling, in whether it's casinos or the lottery, the reality is the further expansion opens up more opportunities for people. The Jonies and the Donnas of the world that I just shared with you never would have thought that gambling would have altered their life for the negative. But it just happened. And now what we're looking at is expanding it to all capacities of our lives. You know, when you talk about buying cigarettes or buying lotto tickets, they're held behind a desk. They're kept away in some ways as a bit of restrictions. Okay? It's not open and accessible as a free-flowing entertainment value as you do in a family restaurant. All right? And when we look at gambling as an entity and gambling as a revenue source, most of us will say, it doesn't happen to me. So as a result, we can look at it objectively. But we need to understand in talking to people and learning more about this issue as I have studied it and listened to the stories. So many of those stories come from people who didn't think they could ever be addicted. What's so harmless with a bingo game? And when we talk about that in our VFW halls, in our church groups with a bingo, but people need to remember, as I hear people describe as recovering from addiction, the high and the exhilaration that they get, even from winning a bingo game, leads to the next desire to say, wow, I can win. Our lottery is an important institution of funding in our state, but their marketing as a promotional gambling entity is $1 in a dream. You got to play to live it. We promote the imagery of living the life of immense wealth because you can have a shot. It plays to our desire for quick money. And I'm concerned that we as a legislature are playing into the same lure of gambling, that this may be a part of the solution. But I'd rather do the hard work in working like the chairman has done in brownfields, in learning to live here, and all the other great legislation that we can to empower people, to help our humanities in our state to succeed. I'd rather do the heavy lifting that way instead of being lured by the idea that it's an instantaneous revenue system that has no consequential effect. I think that's my point, is the fact that as we explore this bill and as people who may be one way or the other, we need to remove ourselves from saying, well, I'm never going to be addicted, but we have to think that we represent a whole constituency out there that may be suffering in silence. And for the industry as a whole, it is a declining marketplace. So the only way a declining marketplace can do is either get bigger, which is what we're trying to do in the gambling industry, or create more players, create more people that are addicted to the game. Either way, the consequences are not in the long-term best interest for our state, in my opinion.
Well, Mr. Chairman, and thank you. And I know other people may want to talk, and I don't want to beat this horse too much. But you know, no, I wasn't even thinking that. But maybe we're talking about aqueducts. But you know, Senator, I guess we're just not going to come to full agreement on this, because I think with the addictive behaviors, you walk into any store and there's a lottery machine there for you. If you have a food problem, there's racks of every kind of food and junk food that probably aren't good for you, right? You walk into a grocery store and there's beer. If you have an alcohol problem, I mean, it's our society. Things are there in front of us, and we have to make choices. And some of us have problems with that, and we develop these problems. But those problems will not go away if we don't do Keno. Those problems will still be there because there are still different lures and different things that will entice people, and some are legal, some are illegal. So I think going through that model that you're talking about, I just think, I mean, then we should just ban alcohol, and we should ban cigarettes, and we should ban everything that could cause harm to us, because it can harm somebody, and I don't think we can do that. And I'm not certainly saying we should, but I think that model is kind of the same thing.
Representative, and I hear you on that, and won't be the first time we disagreed.
Thank you, Representative.
Does that mean you want me to stop?
I will say the difference. Okay. The difference is we as a state are authorizing it. We as a state have decided to get into the business of gambling as a revenue source. And that is one of the biggest challenges I have and the biggest disagreements that I have. With all the challenges we have in life, I understand that. But this is unique because this is state authorized. We are empowering a gambling institution through our legislative action and as a government entity. That is something that I'm not very comfortable with. And ultimately, I truly believe that the greatness of our state, the economic engine of our state, should be based on the innovation, the abilities of our people, not the breakdown of gambling.
I appreciate that. I'll end it, Representative, with just we also allow people to smoke and drink, and by our regulations of those types of things, the state does regulate it and allow it. And I think it's something, the discussion is going to continue long after you and I are in this building. But thank you, Senator. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Senator McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Hwang, for your testimony and your persistence on this topic. I wonder if you, during your visits to your alma mater in New York or our other neighboring states in Rhode Island or Massachusetts, have you had an opportunity to visit an establishment that has Keno as an offering?
Thank you, Senator McLaughlin. And yes, I have. And you know, it's a consistent, contrasting story to what is marketed when we talk about gambling. We talk about the excitement. We talk about a bar scene and a family restaurant where people are engaging and enjoying a meal. What I have seen in Massachusetts are the fact that you have isolated people sitting in a bar alone, playing Keno, waiting for the bouncing ball to settle, and taking out another ticket. And I'll continue on in regards to casinos. I've gone to casinos and walked around and have seen not only are there entertainment, but there are halls and halls of slots and gambling, of people on oxygen tanks, people who look like they've been there all afternoon or all night long, that continue to play and show that form of addiction. Those are images that we don't see in the marketing. Those are images we don't see portrayed on the residuals of gambling. And so, yes, to answer your question, I have seen firsthand, and it certainly is not the picture that is being portrayed. And I see lives forever and negatively altered.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Seeing no other questions, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.